Well, Dana was just a little cutie pie. She just won my heart. Just won my heart immediately. How could she not? Anyway, at one point in time, we took little Dana and went north to Mendocino County. I had some friends too up there, and I got a job actually working in a dental lab in Ukiah. My first time I'd actually ever worked in a dental lab, after the Army where I never did, And the guy I worked for, he was okay. He was very demanding, but that kind of work, requires exactness and whatnot. And so I was learning. I remember he took me down to a big dental lab technicians, some kind of a meeting down in San Francisco, and people gave lots of really interesting talks. One talk that's really stuck in my mind. The guy got up on stage. He says, "We look at life like a tapestry on a wall that's been up on the wall for a long time and starts to deteriorate, and we start to see other images through the holes in the old tapestry, and it looks frightening and discontinuous. But as the old tapestry drops away, we see a new pattern that becomes in itself cohesive and understandable, and so change sometimes is hard at first, but eventually the new pattern emerges, and we see the value of it, and life goes on. That was an image that always stuck with me. But Carol and I were staying in a little rental apartment in Calpella, which is a little community just north of Ukiah, and new baby and all those things that you go through with a new baby. But it was nice. But Carolyn wasn't really happy, and for good reasons. I was kind of it's a different lifestyle, and she missed home and things. It turns out she went home at Christmas time and decided that she really didn't want to come back, and I accepted that. We talked about it. We agreed that we'd never fight over Dana, that we'd always try to be very supportive of each other. As it turns out, over time, Carolyn raised Dana just terrifically. She raised her with good values, which I knew she would. A much better parent than I actually was at that time. I have to admit it without, saying much more than that. But so here I am up in Mendocino, and I'm really not ready to go back to Ontario and living down in Southern California. Mendocino County is beautiful, just gorgeous, and going to the ocean, the hills. I just loved it. So I settled into a new life. I stayed with the dental lab thing for a while, but the guy I worked for had a close friend of his, Jim. I'll call him Jim. And I decided at that point in time that I wasn't going to go on with the dental lab thing. So I did a room addition on a house for Jim, and got into carpentry, which I had learned under the tutelage of a friend's father down in Southern California. In fact, John Cecil Jones, and he was an old merchant mariner and very skilled carpenter. He did it in the old ways, where everything's done with plastic pipe and this, that, and the other. We did our plumbing with iron pipe and lead and oakum and all the old ways of doing things, which was a really wonderful skill to have, because as I moved into areas where other carpenters were doing the new stuff, there was demand for people who, on old houses and old remodeling, who knew the old systems of doing stuff. And so I found a way to make a fair amount of money doing remodels and old kitchen remodels and bathroom remodels and yada yada, all this various stuff. So it served me well, and so I kind of settled into a routine of doing carpentry up there. Still playing music. I had my guitar with me. I moved. Eventually, I moved up on the Eel River, and there was an old stagecoach house. Very interesting old house. We were just looking the other day at the Wolf House out there, and you know, north of Sonoma.
Near Glen Ellen.
Yeah, Glen Ellen, north of Sonoma. And the way they made those fireplaces, well, it was the same thing in this old Stagecoach house. The fireplaces were huge, and people were, of course, just cutting wood and burning this, you know, enormous amounts of wood to keep warm, because that was the only heating they had. They were burning fireplaces, so they made these big fireplaces, enough to create enough heat to drive the heat throughout these larger houses, you know. And it was interesting, in that big driveway, a semicircle, big broad semicircle, where you could have driven a stagecoach in with the horses and unloaded the passengers who were staying up at the John Day grade at this old stagecoach house. And in the front room there was a few bullet holes in the ceiling where the rowdies over time, and you know, shot holes in the roof and that kind of stuff. It was a nice place at that time, and so I settled in there up on the Eel River. It was really fun to watch and there was a dam, kind of a low dam, but it had a fish ladder, which is like steps on a house, because the salmon ran up that ladder, and that was a way to help them get up over the dam that they had built. But I remember when the salmon started running, by the time they got that far up the Eel River, they kind of started sort of reddish, and their noses elongated, almost like a hook, you know. But there'd be thousands and thousands of them backed up against the fish ladder, and then the raccoons and the bears descended and you know, would feast on it. But I can remember driving into because I had that same old yellow Volkswagen that we bought in Amsterdam. We used to tour around Carol and Dieter and I around Europe, and so I can remember coming back to the house at night, you know, and watching the raccoons waddling back from the stream. They were so stuffed with salmon, their little tummies were dragging the pavement, you know. Funny stuff. But it was beautiful. It was a beautiful country. And that was kind of how it was for a while. But eventually, I went down the grade from the Stagecoach house and joined some friends, and we built a house up in the Mendocino National Forest, up in the hills above Potter Valley. Is actually where I was at. Yeah, beautiful place. There was a fellow who ran the irrigation in Potter Valley, played the bagpipes. And you could always tell when he was down in the valley changing the course of the irrigations for the various farmers, because he'd get everything set, and while he waited for the next switch, he'd get out his bagpipes, and you could hear these bagpipes echo through the whole valley. It's very serene. It was a peaceful sort of thing. There was a lot of Vietnam veterans actually were living back in the hills, and there was a friend, Dale, who had been a jet jockey in Korea, he was an F-86 pilot, you know. There was other Rudy Holsinger, who had fought against Franco in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. He was of German ancestry, and at that time, because of politics in Germany, he never could return back to Germany. So he came to the United States, got some kind of doctorate, and worked in psychology and whatnot till he retired. He was, at that point in time, he had retired, but he'd gone out to the hills. And there was Cam, he was another old guy living out there in the hills. So it was an interesting assembly of people. I lived in a tent for a while out there in the hills. I had a double-walled Dutch tent that I had bought in Europe that was really good for insulation. And because sometimes tree branches fell and stuff, I ended up kind of erecting a wood frame, kind of bark lean-to over the top of it for safety, and that made it warmer too. And eventually a bunch of kids from Fresno were out there in the hills too, kind of a bunch of hippie kids, cute bunch of kids really, all came up together, a little clutch of friends. They'd probably known each other since childhood. And one of them built a house up in the trees, had a tree house, and he climbed up in his tree house, and that's where he lived, and helped him build a little kind of a cook shack. And during that period of my life, I was experimenting with the local foods, you know, the acorns and the vetch and the salmon berries and on, all the various things that were out there. And I can't say I developed a great appetite for it. It was, you know, I had grown up on other kinds of food, but I can remember one point through the winter where I didn't have a huge supply of stuff, but I had a big jar of popcorn. So I remember grinding up popcorn and making it in some kind of a stew or soup, you know. Sketchy memories. And I can remember wintertime, way up in the hills, when the snow came especially, and the fog would come in and would lay in the valley, and the next valley, and the next valley, and each mountain looked like an island in the sea of clouds, and you know, it's like you were in some fantasy world, you know. And I'd sit up on the old Eagle Rock and just kind of gaze out there. And sometimes I'd go sit out there in warmer weather, up on the big Eagle Rock, and I'd play my banjo, and this, that, and the other. But it was a time of personal growth. I can remember a time I was thinking about something that was bothering me, you know, thinking about, well, you know, my marriage and my child, and thinking about Vietnam and all this stuff kind of packed in my head. And one day I was kind of sitting there and I said, you know, Dennis, you're sitting in this absolutely beautiful, pristine environment, you know, and the peregrines and the red-tailed hawks and all that stuff circling up there, and the wind was blowing and whatnot. And I said, it's absolutely gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And I said, and here you are, sitting here thinking about these painful things, occupying a space the size of your brain, you know, in this incredible world, you know. And I can remember sitting up on the rocks in those days, and I kind of let the wind blow through me. It was sort of like it's almost like a cartoon, you know. Imagine the wind blowing in one ear and out the other. But just clearing my head, you know, just figuring, you know, I've got to refocus, and because I was at that point, it was beautiful, but I was lonely, and I was really in a kind of a denial kind of thing, denying my life, denying my experiences. And I can remember stepping on a vine one day, and it was a plant on the ground, and I felt sorry, because when you walk in the woods, you try to be careful where you're stepping. It was kind of a misstep, and I kind of crushed it down. But as the days progressed, the thing just picked itself up, and you know, it went back on blooming. It became a lyric in one of my songs. You know, when you tread on a vine as much as it's able to lift its head up and continue on still, all nature affirming, while I was denying. When that truth had sunk in, I went back down the hill, and that's when I went down to Ukiah. And eventually, I got a little house for rental right by the creek that goes through Ukiah. It was under the trees. You wouldn't even know you were in the city, because there was a little bridge in the town and a little creek that went down there, and there was a catch of trees and this little hut. So I got myself a little hut right down, and doing, you know, my own little spot, my own little housekeeping. You know, now I had a house, a spot, did all my own cooking. I lived on tofu and vegetables. That's mostly just as many vegetables as I could round up on any given day, and I'd fry up the tofu and butter and pop in the vegetables. Well, this is about the time I first saw Caroline. I saw her, first of all, I was at a friend's house, and she came through. She was inquiring about something. I just saw her briefly, but then turns out she was running an alternative library up there. She had friends who had given her this spot, and because there was a lot of people out in the hills that were experimenting with alternative ways of living out in the woods, you know, kind of solar, yeah, kind of new age sort of stuff, new age technology, and that kind of stuff, and that was what she was doing. But there came a point where they put on what was called the benefit boogie. Yeah. You remember the benefit boogie? Anyway, there was a couple of fellows that had a little band. It was kind of a little rock band. I'm trying to think of the names there. That was a Hanson Rate band, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Just a second.
Yeah, I'm just saying here.
Just a minute, please.
Anyway, Hanson played most of the rhythm, and David Ray played most of the lead stuff, and they had songs they'd written and whatnot. So they were doing kind of a benefit boogie. Was that for the library, honey? Or was that for other purposes? I can't remember. Yeah, David Ray, he was Bonnie Raitt's brother, you know, the popular singer Bonnie Raitt. David Raitt, and their father had been an actor, I guess, that kind of stuff. But David Raitt and I were friends. When I was out in the mountains, he and his wife had a little place up in the hills, and they'd taken 50-gallon drums and cut them in half and made these wind turbines so they could get generated. So he was generating his own electricity up there, and he'd have visitors. I go up there sometimes, and remember one of his friends came up from Jamaica, and he was doing the Rastafarian music and whatnot. And that's the first I'd ever heard of that kind of stuff, but he was very good at it, because David had our musician friends. I remember going up there and eating, occasionally jamming and stuff. So anyway, he put on this benefit boogie, and Carolyn was put together flyers. In fact, somewhere in our stuff, I've actually got one of your flyers.
Yeah.
I don't know where it is, but
Somebody drew that. I don't even know who drew that.
somebody drew it, you know. And I remember we sat there and colored them. She brought in other people, and we colored all these various flyers and whatnot. Put that together. In fact, the apartment building we later lived in, I guess Bonnie Raitt came up and visited her, but she slept up there in that apartment complex, not in the actual room I was in, but spent a night or so up there in the place where we were living after a while. So we had a nice day together, and that's when Carol and I first got together. You know, was doing these things for the benefit boogie, and which we did up a creek. They had a big pond area, big Honda Dam, a different area than I was just describing before. But people were singing and dancing, and just one of those kind of relaxed Mendocino things, kind of activities. So that's how we first got started.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a lot of details about, you know, what, you know, dating or what. We just sort of just got together. Have to be really close.
It wasn't very formal.
Not formal at all. And I was still kind of, there was a bunch of Pomo Indian rancherias all around the Ukiah area. And I got to be friends with, I called her Mama. She was one of the matrons of that little Pomo tribelet. And she had a son who played guitar, and he was pretty good. He loved Freddie Fender. That was his whole thing, you know. And so I remember going down and jamming with them, and kind of hanging out with this little group of Pomo folks that were there in town. Interesting to be, you know, with. But you know, it's funny because even though they were on the rancherias, and even though they weren't living on their traditional foods anymore, they were eating a lot of white bread and, you know, a lot of meat, and this, that, and the other. But one day I mentioned to Mom, I said, because I had been living out in the hills, I said, "Did you notice what a beautiful acorn harvest we had this year?" And she looked at me kind of funny. I had invaded her space, the psychological space. And she said, why do you want to know about the acorn harvest? I said, well, you know, it's great food, you know, if you need to, you'll eat them. And I kind of put her off. I think, I got the feeling in that environment that a lot of the Pomo were living kind of on the margin of the white man and eating the white man's food, but took a certain comfort in thinking if they ever had to, all their native foods are there in the background, they'd always go back to them. So in a way, I kind of, by mentioning that, I kind of invaded their territory. Very interesting. Because why do you, basically, why do you white men want to know about the acorns, our world, you know, the way we live? And it got me kind of interested in the Pomo. And there was a house called the Sun House in Ukiah, and it's still there. It was Grace Hudson, was that her name?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she was had lived there back in the turn of the 18th, 19th century, in that period of time. And she was a very skilled painter, and she painted many, many portraits of the Pomo people. And this house had a lot of them on display. In fact, I think it's been included at times in traveling displays of the Pomo culture. Beautiful, very, very, very personal pictures of the Pomo children, the Pomo women out there with making their baskets and all this sort of thing. And so I kind of clued myself in on the Pomo culture. And upstairs in the attic, they had a huge collection of Pomo artifacts at Grace Hudson's house. and it figured in later when I finally did come back to Southern California, but that's a couple years down the line yet. That I wrote that paper that got me the best undergraduate paper of the year. I wrote a treatise on Pomo Indians and their wood use, how they used wood, and the things that they said when, you know, that not only what they called the items, but the rituals and things that they said as they used stuff. And I put that together as a paper, and for Otto Sadowski, who was a linguist from who had taught at Berkeley, and he was at that point teaching down at Fullerton, and when he had come from Hungary, escaped during the Hungarian Revolt, 54 I think.
54.
And had come to Berkeley, and he became fascinated with the Penutian language family, because he discovered over 600 words, with 60 words that were totally unchanged, that came right from Siberia. You know, people talk about the land bridge and all that, but when he actually did the analysis of the language, that turned out it wasn't thousands of years ago. It was less than 1,400 years ago, and by boat, according to it. But that's another whole story.
No Aleutian chain.
Yeah, right. Not at all. In fact, there's a whole story there, but it's probably not. Doesn't belong in this particular record. So I really had a heightened appreciation for the Native American culture up there, and what it took to live in that environment, which is a very, very interesting story, which I could share some other time. But as time progressed, Carolyn brought me home to meet her parents, and I came right down here to Fremont, met her dad, loved Ham right away.
Oh, I loved Ham and Pat both.
Yeah, they
My
just.
mom's 97 now.
Yeah, she's still alive. She's at her 97th birthday. She's right here in Fremont.
I know.
And anyway, so I met Carolyn's folks. He liked me. Right away he liked me. Now you wonder how people feel. Isn't that your feeling? Your folks like me. Your dad liked me. He glommed right onto me. He found out I had a Mormon background. I remember him walking around the house humming "Come, Come, Ye Saints" when I was down there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it seemed like a very natural fit, and eventually we were married. And a lot of the family came up for that marriage.
I did.
Yeah, Aunt Lizzie was here.
Mm-hmm.
She was up for the marriage. And her mother, my goodness, we wanted to have the marriage up in Mendocino, up by Lake Mendocino, which you saw. So her mother taught home economics, which is a lost art now. You know, the girls in school don't get that sewing and cooking and all this stuff right here at Mission High School, and taught probably several young generations of young women the homemaking skills. So she got these giant cases of fruit and cooked, made cakes. Oh my goodness.
She catered the whole thing.
She catered right, front to back.
She was busy. The only problem was she was so busy throwing the party, she didn't really get to enjoy being at the wedding with her friends and everything, but she was managing everything.
Yeah, but she had some, Junie was there.
Yeah,
Her friend that she grew up with, that kind of thing. So we had it was a wonderful wedding, and it was a hot day, but we had even hired a little country band. You remember that little country band? And our theme song for the wedding was Blue Skies, you know, Willie Nelson singing a version of Blue Skies, smiling at me, nothing but blue skies. And the sky was perfectly blue that day. And a lot of my friends, and some of your friends, a lot of my friends out of Potter Valley, out of the mountains, were all there. So it was a mixing of older and newer all together. As you may recall, it was quite a mixture of people. And so Carolyn she was living in the uptown apartment, and so that was our home after we were married. And I'm just trying to think what I can say about it. That spot's still there. I swung through Ukiah. Now they've changed the front door and put a pass lock on it. In our days, you could just walk through the front door and going up to the apartments. And we had an apartment that our windows looked right out on an old brick saloon and hotel, which had been there since,
That
practically.
apartment went through the '06 earthquake.
Yeah, the one we were in, went through the '06, yeah. But,
Way
and right across the street, if you looked out the window, they had a little room with a door, and it was when they captured old, what was it, what was his name?
Black
Black
Bart.
Bart.
Yeah, Black Bart. When they finally caught him, they caught him by a laundry ticket that he,
Yeah, right.
That was in San Francisco.
anyway, when they,
They were
yeah,
shocked he was a wealthy mine owner.
but when they captured him, they held him overnight in that little room right out our window, right across the street. That's where they held Black Bart before they took him back. They finally worked out an arrangement with him that if he would stop raiding or robbing his coaches, they'd put him on a pension, which is what they did.
He did. Yeah.
And that's how he lived after that. If he wouldn't rob, he could get a yearly pension from Wells Fargo, and that was funny stuff.
I don't want your money, ma'am. I want Wells Fargo's money.
So, but anyway, our apartment window looked right at that little place where they held Black Bart, and right there, right on. What was the name of our street? Was it-
West Smith, wasn't it?
Yeah, West Smith. That's right, West Smith, right off of the main thoroughfare. 2 blocks from the courthouse. And we didn't have a lot of money, but it wasn't long into our relationship that Carolyn, I think, was more aware of it than I was. My issues were something I kind of kept to myself, but she realized that we would benefit by maybe introducing religion into our life. We'd been married by a Reverend Gaffney from the Methodist Church there in town, nice guy, and Carolyn said, one day she said, Dennis, maybe we ought to go to church, and she suggested we go to Reverend Gaffney's church. And I said, no, I don't know. I said, if I was to ever go back to church, I'd go to my mother's church. And that's exactly how I said it, because I always identified the church really as Mom's church and Dad, because growing up, Dad was kind of in and out,
He wasn't a member at all until '54, and he really didn't embrace it till '61. So,
Yeah, and by the end of '65, I was gone, so I always identified it more as Mother's church in
Yeah.
my mind.
and I actually do too, if you're talking about that time period. It's
Yeah.
almost 100% Mom's church.
Yeah, yeah. And Dad came around, and in the end, Dad really grew up in the church and embraced it. And I remember after Mom's passing, he very so much wanted to be, to have Mother's, that eternal marriage with Mother, that he really wanted to live right. After he married Ruth Ann, he went on a mission and did everything he could to where Mother would find him acceptable in the eternity, And so I give Dad total credit, but at that point in my life, it was Mom's church, in my way of thinking. And so she says, okay. So, I haven't set foot inside of a Mormon church, I should say, in modern times. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I had not set foot in church for years, and so I take her, she's wide open, just wide open. Me, I'm walking in there like my doom's descending upon me, but she wants this, and I knew we needed it.
I don't remember it that way at all. I thought we just decided to go to church. I thought it was that simple.
Well, you didn't know what was going on in my head.
No, I didn't.
It was a real challenge for me. But we went in there, and she took to it immediately. I know she gets a little uncomfortable, but she got a little teary. She's sitting next to me. And I turned to her, I said, Carolyn, what's the matter? She says, I don't know, but I'm home. That was it. And so we got up to leave, and as we're headed for the back door, here comes the 2 missionaries. They're just vectoring in on us, just like this. And I know what's coming. And they asked Carolyn if they could come visit us. Isn't that right?
It would be rude to say no if someone wants to come visit you.
Yeah.
And she says, why, sure. And me, to my everlasting shame, I went, not no, but,
Not real sure about this thing.
And you remember the name of those missionaries, don't you?
Elder Sturdivant and Elder Falber.
elder servant. And
Remember, I went through that in '71 when I had to come back after I'd been gone
You know,
like
it's
6
funny,
years.
because people who've been away from the church feel like the earth is gonna shake if they walk in the door.
I know, I
Well,
did
my friend
too.
Jody went back to church and there really was an earthquake that day.
That's funny.
Oh, when I realized it was true and I had to go back, I'm going, no, I don't want to go to church.
Well, you know, I squirm to this day. I never liked sitting in pews, you know, in church. No matter what's going, it could be a wonderful sermon, excuse me. The spirit could be just thick, so thick you cut it with a knife, and I still squirm. I'm just a squirmy, wormy. I'm uneasy sitting in one place too long. I've always been on my feet and moving. I just sit in one place for it. So church always challenged me that way, just sitting and going through that, you know, 1 hour, 2 hours, and those days 3 hours, you know. Oh my goodness, you know, it was. But I was willing to do it. Do you remember where Elder Farber and Elder Sturtevant were from?
No, I don't. I've got one of their one of their cards.
Yeah, well, she loved them. I mean, you know, young missionaries, and so she has really good, strong memories of them. Next thing you know, we're baptized and we're in church, and we were trying to start a family at that time, but it took a year and a half or so before we got Jed, wasn't it? It was
It took a
quite,
while.
it was quite a while before she was able to get pregnant, and so we got little Jed, and he was born right there in Ukiah, in the Ukiah. You remember the name of the hospital?
Well, probably Ukiah General.
Yeah, Ukiah General. It was the local hospital, and we bundled off, went to the hospital, and he was born just pretty much as the sun was getting ready to come up.
Yeah, he was. It was a
Right
good time then.
right at dawn. And I remember that they're in the room and they bring him into us, and you can just see the glow of the morning sun outside the windows, and we're looking at our new little baby Jed, you know, and you know how when a baby's born, how the head will dislocate a little bit, the head bone, so the baby can go through the birth canal.
Sagittal suture has to.
Yeah, and so his head was a little bit elongated and whatnot, and he had a really clear complexion. And Karen looked at him and she says, "He looks Jewish."
Well, it's the shape of his head.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you would characterize a Jewish person looking, but it was an interesting comment, and we came up with the name Jed, never thinking that anybody could mess with it. You know, if you'd call him Jedediah.
No, we don't have to go there.
We don't have to go there. You know, kids might make fun of it, but we thought Jed was a nice, clean name that would probably get him through. I still think it's a great name. I don't think he particularly likes his name, but at the time he was a Jed. You know, we really felt that. And I sort of got tucked in. You know, well, we all did, but I did as far as working where I had worked independently over the years. You know, doing carpentry there. You know, to feed myself. I never used food stamps, any of that sort of stuff, which a lot of people would be using out in the hills and stuff. I always, you know, earned my own money and this, that, and the other. But once I became a member, then there were several contractors in that ward. Ukiah, which ward were you, Ukiah first or second?
First.
Yeah, that's what I thought, Ukiah first. And so I worked for Steve Harden for a while, and we built homes down in Cloverdale. We built homes up in Willett. We built homes.
Well, you didn't build that many. He was
Yeah.
a very small builder.
Yeah, he was, but we did 3 homes with him, and then when he moved back, I think he wanted to be kind of more of a rugged mountain man. He went back to Idaho or
He had a
something.
little boy that had some physical problems. They inherited a child from a family member.
Oh, his
They
sister died.
adopted. Yeah.
His sister died.
And
That's
so there was
right.
something going on with the baby.
Yeah, and so they ended up moving somewhere kind of out in the wilds in northwest. I'm glad you're here because I don't remember a lot of that stuff. But and so I went to work for another carpenter in the ward, and the Christensen, Ken Christensen, and they were a very long established family there in Ukiah, and very, very much involved in the ward. We made some we made one family friend, Submerslickers, was that their last name?
Yeah, that
Sub-
sounds familiar.
Submerslickers was the family name, but he was a direct descendant of Stephen Foster, the guy that wrote all those famous American
Old
songs.
Black Joe and Swanee
Yeah,
River.
all the stuff that you really don't want to sing for fear of hurting somebody's feelings, right? Or getting
Old
mad.
Folks at Home.
Yeah.
Old Kentucky Home.
Swanee River and all that kind of stuff. But he was, and then I don't know if it was through them that we got to know the Howards, and the Howards were an old pioneer family that had come into that area. Oh, way back in the day. I mean, talk about pioneer families. I mean, Carolyn's family shows up in the 1850 census in California. Her
I'm
people,
fifth generation.
fifth generation California.
People go off on California and they lose me right there.
She loves California. I mean, her people are here that early in California, but
Grandmother was born.
yeah. So, but the Howards were that way, and coming across the plains, the Howards were huge people, and you kind of lean and mean, you know, but big people. When I would shake his hand, I'd put my hand out, and his hand would come and envelop my hand. I mean, like just envelop it. And there's a story in his family that one of his ancestors had a mule that was misbehaving, so he hit the mule in the head and knocked it out. Bong, you know. You know, but a real gentle-hearted kind of guy, and for some reason he liked me. And Sister Howard, what was her name? Marie Howard, that's right. And they had some children already and whatnot. And eventually he became like a fire chief there in Ukiah for a while. And then the politics and stuff, he said to heck with it, you know, all the local politics, and they moved up there in the foothills below Mount Whitney. What was the name of that town?
Oh, yeah, in the Sierras.
Yeah, and finally I've heard that recently he's moved back. But so we had some nice friends in the ward there, and our bishop was a body and fender front end man for lining tires and stuff. And what was his name?
Sacchi,
Bishop Sacchi, S-A-C-C-I, an Italian name. But he was humble,
I was impressed, you know,
the sweetest man.
being new to the church, I was impressed that the bishop would just be a civil mechanic, not, you know.
Yeah, you know, it wasn't, you know, some pastor beating on the pulpit. He was just a simple and sweet man. So we got kind of gently tucked into the Ukiah First Ward, and made other friends. And I'm thinking of and she's Stephanie. She's still living up there. She's still living up in Ukiah. Her husband was a convert, but he didn't hang in there. He went inactive, and eventually they were divorced. But she is still up there, and just a very sweetheart lady. But they were friends, and they had a couple of young girls too, and so we had people that we could socialize with at that time. So they called me to the Weeblos, to do the boys, and I remember taking them on. I like to take them out on hikes. That was my favorite thing to do. As I'm older and have had other callings in the Scouts and now Activity Aid Boys, I've done a lot of projects, but in those days, I just like to take them out hiking. And we had Otto Ermer, his parents, I guess, were German. He still had this very German name, Otto Ermer, kind of a solid rock kind of person. He had a large piece of property, and he let us plant a garden. And that was a really...
Well, he opened that to anybody in the ward that wanted a garden.
Well, that's true, but we did it. We took him up on it, and we had a good-sized garden.
Yeah, we did.
And very productive. That soil, I don't know what it was, but it's more productive than we've ever been with a garden here. I think the soil here's a little bit depleted because this is all apricot orchards for decades.
Leach all the things out of the
Yeah, yeah. So you have to. I think the soil would be better if we could add more to it. But we
plant
both
some soybeans and
yeah.
plow them under for a year.
Yeah. So I like to garden. When we were down south, Carolyn Dieter and I had a big garden down there on Central on the way to Chino, and that sort of thing. And Carol likes to garden too, so it was a natural. We both did it. We worked hard. And next thing you know, we've got ourselves a little baby boy, and life is moving on for us. And then things started to change in the environment up there. There was a big masonite factory that used a lot of wood for making masonite. It's kind of a pressed fiber thing. The masonite factory, which had been the financial mainstay of the Ukiah economy in that area, closed down.
Well, Reagan got elected and we went into a recession because inflation was so high.
Yeah, and anyway, so the mills started laying off people, and the economy just went into tank. And so I'm there. I've got a new family. I'm trying to support them, and I remember through that winter, because there wasn't any big jobs for even for the regular contractors. In some cases, the contractors were working with each other to stay busy on larger jobs, and really couldn't afford to hire on the extra guys like me. And I remember we built this huge house out in Boonville, where they had their own language, Bootling, which is a story.
That was World War II.
World War One era. But they still preserved it. In the valley, people still spoke Bootling or Boont. And for instance, a cup of coffee was a horn of Z. Right, that's how you Z's. Great. It's good to have somebody who remembers better than me. But anyway, we built this huge house on the side of the hill. It was a copy of this woman's ancestral Swiss chalet in Europe, and it was huge, big, high-pitched roof and whatnot. I remember that was one of the last big projects I had. And so when the economy fell apart, I was kind of reduced to tearing out rotted bathroom floors, because I was, again, working for myself. Kitchen floors. There was a realtor up there, Ernie Fine, who, buying and selling houses, and he had to fix them up ahead of time, or do some repair work for rentals and stuff. And so I did that kind of stuff, but that winter, tearing up these old rotten bathroom floors, I caught one cold after another. I was sick all the time. And I said, finally, I said, I've had it. We need something different. So we decided that maybe time to go south. I didn't really want to go south, but time to go south and finish my education, and use the GI Bill, which I knew that I had, and not understanding at that point all the other benefits that were available for my children and stuff. But anyway, so that's when we went south, and we finished the bachelor's, and that's where I wrote that paper, the poem, because because I knew Otto Sadowski, this professor, was very much interested in the other Indian language families in California, and I knew a bit about the Pomo. So he knew a lot about the Penutians, but he was curious how much of the Siberian language was reflected in the other language families. Turns out the Pomo are part of the Hohokam language family, and it's different from the Penutian. So it didn't satisfy his curiosity to that degree, but it got me the best graduate paper of the year. Worked really hard for that, but we had left all our stuff behind in storage, in a big storage shed up in Ukiah and whatnot, and so I had always kind of intended to return. So we went back up there, and we stayed for a while. We had sublet our apartment to a young gal in our ward, and so it was still available, and we lived there for a while, but it wasn't really where we needed to be. I figured if I was going to get anything, maybe I needed to get a master's. And so that's when we loaded everything we could in a truck that we borrowed from the dad. And the problem
December
was,
24th.
Yeah.
yeah, and it turned out that, and I don't know how aware Ham was of it, but the exhaust pipe came from the engine, went over the top of the rear end, rear axle, and then exited out the back of the truck. Well, right at the point, this hump where it went over the rear axle, there was a crack in the exhaust pipe, which was about this far away from the bed. And so it was putting on that way down there, and we were actually coming through the Grapevine when that thing heated enough that set everything in the bed of the truck on fire. And when I realized it was on fire, I pulled over, and Carolyn got out and I told her to go over. It was right off the freeway, over by the fence. But me, I'm up there. I'm trying to pull stuff off the truck so it doesn't burn. Lost instruments and clothing, all sorts of stuff. And this trucker pulled over, bless his heart. He jumps out of his truck and he pulls out his fire extinguisher. He pushes the lever and his fire extinguisher is dead. It didn't work. He was so frustrated.
Yeah, he wanted to help.
He wanted to help so bad, but so we sat there and watched it and just. And so this other couple stopped by, and they lived. Where did they live? Clear across the LA someplace.
Well, they were so nice.
But they offered to take Carolyn and you know and Chad. Now.
They took me to their house until. I don't remember what all happened.
Yeah, we had to drive clear across LA to retrieve them, but they could, and me, I went with the tow trucks and all the other stuff. And eventually I got home, and then Dad helped me to go retrieve them from where she was when we got back there. Well, word got out to our ward up there in Ukiah that we had this truck fire, and one of the members of our ward, he ran a trucking business up there in Ukiah, you know, the big trucks. And Dennis, what was his last name?
Yes, I know, I'm not thinking of it.
Yeah. So anyway, the word got around the ward that we'd had a fire, and they loaded up a flatbed, full-size truck, you know, Freightliner truck, with goods and sent it down to us, boxes of clothes, and there was how much? There was an actual weight of, there was a ton or two of stuff on that.
Yeah, there was a ton of stuff. They weighed it before and after our supper, and there was a ton of stuff.
A ton of stuff, yeah, on that bed, and sent it down to us, you know, everything we could have needed to get by. Yeah. And I don't know if you must have been pregnant at that point, right? Or nearly so.
I think it was.
Yeah. And so it wasn't long before we were going to have Sally. And that was, we were living in the guest house at that point. And I remember that was about the time also the dad.
We went to the guest house. Cheryl gave us her bedroom.
That's right. We were in the bedroom upstairs, and we had to go through Mom and Dad's bedroom first. But then who let us have the guest house for was that Ben?
Ben was in the guest house.
Ben was in, that's
he
right.
Just let us stay there when the baby was born. It kind of wiggled him out to have a baby born in his bed, but.
Yeah, but Sally was born in the guest house.
I knew that.
And it's really interesting because Carolyn was kind of feeling the contractions coming on, and so I'm getting ready to do things, and I didn't realize how far along she was. We had gone to training. We had a midwife in line, and a good midwife, and so about the time I'm ready to go in there, she's getting ready to have a baby right there on the spot, and mom was kind of she wasn't panicked, but she was excited. What can I do? What can I do? You know, because she is so. We decided that Mom could boil water. That was Mom.
That was her idea.
Was that her?
Yeah, she figured you're having a baby, you gotta have some boiled water, so she didn't know what to do to help, so she went and boiled up some water.
Thank
That's
you.
what she knew how to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, I'm glad because this part I've got somebody who can collaborate me on this stuff, and here comes cute little Sally, and fortunately we didn't have any birth complications later when Andy was born. He had his umbilical cord wrapped around his neck twice. And every time that she would push, the monitor in the hospital showed that he was going into stress. So if anything like that had happened to Sally, we'd have lost her, even though we had a good midwife.
Yeah.
But we had no complications at all when Sally was born in the guest house.
I remember you buried that placenta out in the backyard.
Yeah. But that's an Indian thing. I got the Poma, they buried the
Oh,
placenta.
I didn't watch
That would enrich that soil, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not that big a thing. It wouldn't have done much, but and so I ended up finishing the masters. Now we wanted to come north again after Sally was born. You're gonna have to help me a little bit here. And for a while we stayed at your folks' house.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was that her sister Diane and Art also at that time needed someplace to stay, so they came in. So all of a sudden, we kind of pig-piled us and the Brownlees in there, and it was
Too many
just
people.
too many people, and it was stressing her mother quite a bit. And so we rented an apartment up there about 3 blocks from the mission, right up on Washington Boulevard, and that was our first apartment together. And we had, Jed and little Sally, and we were in that ward. Eventually, and I was doing odd jobs. I remember I was supposed to go to work for this gal and put an indoor jacuzzi and bathroom, enlarge the bathroom, put an indoor jacuzzi. And I'd set aside other smaller jobs ready to do this. And at the last minute, she says to me, Dennis, my boyfriend wants to take me to Mexico. We put this off for a while. Well, before that, when I first got here, they were building homes up in Antelope Hills. It's a district up in Fremont, very big 2-story monstrosity homes. And here in Ukiah, where the economy was so bad, I was getting maybe $7 an hour. And here in Fremont, they were hiring kids off the street. If you had a nail bag and a hammer, they were paying $12, $15 an hour. I couldn't believe it. So I got up there, and eventually I got more money than that. But I helped build a number of those homes up in the Antelope Hills. They had one where they framed it and had it kind of move out of position. They were really struggling with it, and I knew what to do. I got their come-alongs and braces, and I pulled the whole thing back into square and saved it. Otherwise, they might have had to tear the whole thing down. And they discovered up there that I was a good finish carpenter when I'd done a lot of things with John Cecil Jones. When I was going to school down in that last year for the Masters, I was working with him, and we did lots of remodels. We remodeled an old post office. I'm not sure where, was that Cucamonga, into a home, and again, all this old wiring, the 2 strands of wire that run through porcelain, and all the iron. He knew how to do that stuff, and so we went and did that. And I remember a housing tract that we had in Upland where they had built all these homes, and the doors were starting to kind of fall out of the jambs. They were going badly out of square, and somebody asked me if I could fix it. And I went in and I could see what the problem was. That when they put the door jambs up, they put 1, 2, 3 nails in the whole jamb on both sides, and so all the doors were literally falling out of the frame. So it was an easy fix, but I was really kind of appalled. And by that time I wasn't working with John. I was working independently when I was doing the Masters. And then somebody else mentioned, well, my neighbor's having the same problem. That whole housing tract was just slam, bam, bam, and everybody was having the door jambs falling out. So I had a run of work, rehanging people's doors and stuff. So by the time I got up to Ukiah and worked up there building homes, because I built homes with both Steve Harden and with Brother Christensen. I had then done the houses in Antelope Hills. I was pretty skilled, and so they put me on what they called the pickup. I would go through the houses when they were finished. I would go through and fix any perfection. That was my job. Sometimes the electricians would come in and cut a hole in the wall and correct something electrical, and then they'd leave this big hole in the wall where you had the drywall had already been hung, it had all been textured and everything, and now they've got a big hole in the wall. Or any number of imperfections before the home is ready to go on the market. And I knew I had to learn the trick of you could fill the hole with drywall, and then I would take it was a kind of a wire mesh thing and I'd make it into these pads, and by dipping it in the drywall, I could reproduce the texture to where you never knew they'd cut a hole in the wall, and so I was pretty valuable to him. And so there's he's dead and gone now. Who was that? The family up there by the mission. old man, he's a friend of your dad's.
Are you thinking of the guy that run the hardware
MacGyver's.
store? Yeah.
Yeah. MacGyver was a friend of Ham's, and his family had owned that hardware store right across the street from the mission since pioneer days. And his father had owned the store, and then it was a blacksmith. His father would shoot horses and that, and MacGyver had inherited the store. And he was a really gracious man. If a person came in, they needed to fix something, they didn't have a tool, he'd lend them the tool. Just wanted kind of a family business right there. And by that time, he knew I had worked in a number of projects before I went building the homes in the hills there. And he says, you know, Dennis, after I finished with those homes and I was going to do this indoor jacuzzi, and I told him what was happening. He says, you know, with the range of skills that you have, they desperately need a new carpenter down at the city of Newark. And at first I didn't really listen to him because I was hoping maybe to go on with something else, but I could suddenly see I had about at least a 2-week hole in my, and you know, when you're doing odd jobs, you can't afford to give up 2 weeks of pay. When you're renting a home, apartment, feeding a new family. And so I went down there and talked to the guy who was hiring, and he hired me on the spot. 3 months later, they closed the big truck factory down there, and all these workers were out of jobs. And hundreds of people applied for those jobs when they came up, couldn't get them. Me, I walked in, they gave it to me. And so, and my first boss is interesting, an old timer, and he was kind of curious about me. His brother had converted to the LDS church, and they were twins. They were old men, but they were twins. And so he was kind of curious what Mormons were like, you know. That's how he said it. And I got along graciously with him. The guy that had been working under him, when he retired, he naturally moved up to the position. He'd been there for years, his second man. But I was the shoes on the ground, and that's what I did. I took care of the city of Newark for over 15 years. Worked up there, and they never gave me anything I couldn't do. Fremont, the city of Fremont, they had carpenters, they had air conditioners, they had plumbers, they had, you know, did I say electricians? You know, they had specialties. The city of Newark didn't have anything, so I was it. I was everything. And they hired another younger fellow to work along with me, and we basically took care of everything. I never knew in the morning. Well, I never, may be an exaggeration. There was sometimes a job started one day and I had to finish it the next. But typically, when I got up in the morning and drove down there, and it was only just across the freeway. You know, people in the Bay Area were commuting long distances. I just had to drive down Stevenson, you know, turn right and go down Central, and I was at work, you know. So I had an easy drive. I never knew what I'd walk into. Oh, okay, the HVAC, air conditioning's gone down. In finance department, okay, go over and fix the air conditioning. You get there, oh, the homeless shelter, the pipe bursted by the front door, and you know, and this, that, and the other. And so, and I was pretty much, the guy I worked for, Mike he was kind of a laid back. He was Irish by heritage, a good Catholic family, and he was never bossy. He was just sort of, here's the work orders, and so I was my own man. And that was pretty much true for 15 years. I just got there, got the work orders, went out and fixed it. You know, whatever it was. The fire department, they needed exhaust evacuation on their fire engines, you know, because you fire them up and it spews all this exhaust into the fire department. And so they had these fume extractions, so I had to design this fume extraction thing with hoses that went up to the ceiling and big blower fans to blow it out. I designed it all, put it all together, and even at Christmas time, when it came time to decorate the city Christmas tree, which was about 4 stories high, they put me on the fire department would get a hook and ladder out there, and I'd go up the ladder, way up in the air, and they'd move the ladder, and I'd wrap the lights around the Christmas tree all the way down. I'd worked on 30-foot ladders. Never bothered me. heights weren't a problem at that point. Years later, when I had the stroke, and my feet never quite knew where they were, I had to quit working on ladders because I took serious falls, but that was after I retired. And I got scars on my back from one fall I took. But back then, I wasn't afraid of anything. I just go ahead and tackle it. And
Do you realize how amazing you are? You don't.
well, you just, you know, you look at it, you figure it out, and you do it. You know. And if
You don't even realize that you're amazing.
But anyway, so that's what I did. And there came a point where the young fellow that was working for me, he got a job as a building inspector up in one of the other cities, and through a friend he had in the fire department up there. And
Tell about the time that we got a double raise right when we were ready to move into this house.
yeah, well, we're going to church, paying our tithing, always very carefully paying our tithing. And here, you know, well, there came a point where suddenly I've got a job and I'm getting a better salary, and it's going up, and we needed to buy a home. We could see prices were jumping. We got this thing for $120,000. This house on the market now is over $1 million. And this time, because it's the Bay Area, it's Silicon Valley, and so the prices are just crazy through the roof. This house is worth over $1 million. But we knew, we could see it coming, and so when it came time to buy, and Carolyn's the one who really understood it. Her dad did real estate. He actually owned some property in town and understood it. So Carolyn was more attuned to this than that, so I give her credit for raising my awareness. It's time to buy. And so she's right. When it came time to buy, and we were counting our pennies. Right, all of a sudden they gave me a double step
Well,
raise.
what happened was, you never got a raise. Once in a while you'd get a cost of living increase. But Wayne was going to get a job someplace else, and they wanted to keep Wayne. So in order to keep Wayne, they gave Wayne a raise. So since Dennis was the next step up in seniority, they had to give Dennis a raise if they were giving Wayne a raise. So out of the clear blue sky, right when we're on the line to buy this house, wondering how we're going to pay for it really, because we're on a budget, we were in escrow, and he gets a double raise. And I got my first spring group, so I had 2 groups that year instead of
Yeah,
one.
she never had to work out of the home, but she worked so hard at home here, placing students to supplement our income until things got more comfortable down the line. But Wayne went anyway. He left.
But that was later on though.
Pardon?
That was later on though.
Not much.
He stayed for a while.
Yeah. So there was a period of time when Wayne left where I held down all of the maintenance for the entire city of Newark. You know, City Hall, all the fire departments, the police departments, the libraries, all that stuff. I was carrying the entire maintenance load myself for about 8 months. And I was working really hard. My callings in the church became more demanding, and a young family growing here. I was starting to, I had a reemergence of ulcerative colitis problems after we came into the church, and I did Aunt Lizzie's estate, settled that, and that was a real issue when I was doing my degree down there. But the colitis started to really flare up, and me, I don't know when to say stop. It all had to be done, and there was nobody else to do it, so I did it. And I carried that whole city, all the maintenance for the whole city for about 8 or 9 months.
I'll bet their eyes sure opened up wide when they realized that they had to replace you. Maybe not as they had to replace you, but when they replaced you.
Well, I was well liked. In fact, when finally I was so sick I couldn't work anymore, and they got another guy to work with me after Wayne. He was a retired naval officer. He had been he'd served on one of the big aircraft carriers, and was actually in line to take command of his own ship. And he had run the maintenance on board this aircraft carrier, and he could type really fast and this, that, and the other. And so I teamed with him, and we put every piece of equipment on a maintenance schedule. These old timers over there hadn't done that, but we had the whole thing all worked out on a maintenance schedule, but here it's time for me to go. And I didn't get along with the guy. In fact, he'd hired on working in the Parks Department, and I could see he was a very bright man. Robert McKinney, he'd grown up, he was kind of an orphan that had been shuffled off somewhere in the Midwest and was raised by the local volunteer fire department felt sorry for him, so they raised him in the back of the fire department, basically gave him a spot. And so he came up rough, and he'd come through the enlisted ranks and clawed his way up to become an officer in the Navy. He was one of those kind of guys. So very, very capable man. But he was kind of a John Wayne type, you know. I didn't get along with him well, but I recommended that when they were opening up for a hiring, I said, hire him out of Parks, this guy. It ends up after I was gone, he ended up running the entire maintenance division in Fremont, New York. He was that, I knew he was that capable. But we kind of bounced off of each other. But we got the job done, and this and that. I knew it was very valuable. Time came for me to go, and people knew I was going. It was just, oh no. And in fact, people knew that I needed surgery and this, that, and the other. And so, as it turned out, the July 1st, when the hospital, they said that colon has to come out. It no longer is even functioning. I was sick. I was yellow. I was in terrible shape. But that July 1st, turns out it was exactly 15 years from the time they'd hired me for the city of Newark, and precisely within the window of being qualified to get PERS. Had I been sick 6 months earlier, I would not have got my PERS retirement. I got my PERS retirement, plus they put 3 years on for Army time. So I got 18 years of retirement from the city of Newark, and went into surgery, and they took out my colon on July 5th. And by then, Carolyn, in her wisdom, had talked to a friend that said, you know, my husband was in the service, but he wasn't overseas or anything, but he got injured on a job stateside somewhere. And because of that, he had a medical disability when he was discharged. I was discharged with no ratings at all, except my medical record, thank goodness, you know. And because of that, he got benefits to send all of his kids to college. And Carolyn said, why don't you do that? And I kind of, at that time, had said, right, I'm done with the Army, that black history. I don't want anything to do with it. Leave it behind me. I was not looking back. Just right now, forget the past. And that was how I operated, psychologically, how I operated. But anyway, so Carolyn insists, she's calling around. She gets me an appointment with Zach, and he'd been in the Army. He was Zachary Gabriel, very Jewish, wonderful man. He had me in his office, and he took me apart in about 15 minutes or less. And he said, you've got serious PTSD. And they put me through tests, and he said to me, I'm surprised how serious your PTSD, because they have all these tests they put you through, like sequences of numbers and all these crazy things they do. So I got that rating. Here I am, I just made it over the line to get a full retirement, and I made out the retirement. I could have taken more, but I made out the retirement to take slightly less. So if I died, Carolyn's got that retirement the rest of her life. She got my retirement.
That's what I did. When I died,
Yeah.
she just keeps
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, which is different than a lot of people do. And if I go, she'll get about maybe $1,500 of my medical rating from the VA. But by the time I thought, okay, well, how do I prove I had colitis in the Army? I wasn't sure how in the world I could do that. I have to, the only thing I could do was try to find people who could vouch that I was sick when I came out of the Army. Carolyn, went to Carolyn Dieter. Ed Teal, I wrote a letter to him because he knew how sick I was at the end when I had to quit Gordon Ayers. And all these people, I was trying to round up proof that I was actually having a problem in the service. but it never mattered because they had my medical records from Germany, and it was right in there. Onset ulcerative colitis or whatever it was, you know. So that was it. I got rating for that. I got rating. In other words, I was sick in the Army. I had PTSD, and when they added all the elements of the rating up, it was 90% disability. Yeah, and then they sent my rating down back from St. Louis or wherever they do this stuff, and they sent it to Los Angeles instead of San Francisco, and it's sat on a shelf for several months in LA until they looked. Huh?
A year. It took them 2 months, 2 years.
Was that a year? Was it a year before they got that from LA? Yeah.
It sure was.
Yeah, but they got it back here eventually, and they put me 90. And when you hit 90, at my age, they just bumped it to 100%. And so suddenly, I got this. Not only they pay you for for that rating, but they pay you back to the time that you applied to get it, and it had been, I guess, several years, and so they gave me all that back money, back to when they first rated me, and plus the stipend. So suddenly I had retirement from the city of Newark and 100% stipend from the government, and Social Security when I turned 65, and so suddenly I could live in the Bay Area, comfortably retired, you know. And so, but you know what I really attribute it all to is paying tithing, faithfully paying tithing. I've always carefully made sure we covered that. And I think the Lord blessed me. I mean, when I couldn't work anymore, I you know, I had arrived at the point where I could retire from the city. And the people, they knew there was a period of time where I had to quit working before the ratings came in. The people of the city of Newark put together a pool and actually contributed their vacation time and whatnot to cover me. Because I'd worked for many people. They all, you know, with the difficulty of Robert McKinney, that naval officer, skilled man and too useful not to have. I didn't like him, but I knew he was good. Except for his grumbling, people in all the departments of the city contributed
2 months.
of leave and medical out of their own.
They wouldn't let them take sick pay. They had to take vacation day. That was a personal sacrifice to their vacation.
Yeah. So that was vacation day. Yeah. I'm glad you remember that. So these people, these friendships I'd cultivated over the years, they just came out of the woodwork and got me through that initial hump. I'm a very blessed man, you know, in that regard. And so our life goes on. Of course, we've got a growing family, and we've got, you know, Bradley and then Andy. You know, every one of my children. The one thing I always wanted, and I thought maybe I wouldn't have after my first marriage broke up, I knew I had a lovely daughter in Dana, and I knew that Carolyn would be raising her well, but I always wanted more kids. I love kids, you know, and so, you know, my quiver is full, you know, in that sense. Every one of my children is just remarkably wonderful people. You know, Jed is so bright and so capable, and Sally is so loving and dear, and she, you know, because of that GI Bill, we were able to send her to Berkeley. She got her degree in art from Berkeley, and that's why she runs that art studio up there and whatnot. And Brad, you know, just Brad was going to make it happen. If it wasn't going to happen, he made it happen. When he couldn't find playmates to play with, he escaped the yard one day and went down the neighborhood knocking on doors to find a playmate. Scared her to death. You know, all of a sudden our kid's missing. He's taken off, and some gracious person called. You know, do you have a son?
Yeah, they taught him his phone number
at school. Yeah.
Fortunately, yeah. I thought he was in
the lady called and said, "Do you have a son?"
Yeah.
Oh goodness! But you know, that was Brad, and where the other kids were more shy, especially Jed and Sally to some degree. Brad was going to make it happen. You know, he needed friends, so he went over into the other wards and he found other kids in the church to be friends with. He made and a friend with John Stout, who's a wonderful family. Is John was on a track to become an engineer, and it was Brad, and I think hanging with John was what really kind of turned the
John's friendship was pivotal.
yeah, and choosing to go on a mission, go to the Philippines.
Good young man.
Got over there and saw the situation. He had that very frightening brain tumor when he was about 7,
I
right?
remember that.
Yeah. Oh, that was what a time that was. He and there's a whole story that goes with that. But remember watching him being wheeled in on the gurney. They dressed him. They put a white cap on his head and ready for surgery. And they had a teddy bear. They even put a white surgical cap on his teddy bear. And they're wheeling him in there, and my heart's just to the floor. And I'm watching my boy go in there with a brain tumor, not knowing where this is going. But the doctor was an old guy, done it for years, knew what he was doing. Wasn't long till he retired, this doctor, but he went in there and found the brain tumor. It was encapsulated. It had not spread anyplace else. He took it out, and he bears that scar and will the rest of his life. But I think that's what sensitized Brad and especially in, I think, Philippines, and seeing the poverty of the people and whatnot. I think that had a lot to do with him. He said, I want to be a doctor. And when Brad decided he wanted to be something, suddenly he didn't want to go to the local college. Well, but he said, no, I want to go to BYU.
Well, he said it was, I said, what it's like, though, and he said, well, it's like the movie Singles Ward, the local ward. Yeah, it was like the movie Singles Ward.
Right.
He needed a stretch.
So suddenly we needed a hunk of money. I dug through my military collection, and in about a week, I don't know how I did it, but I sold about $1,400 worth of stuff online. That with what he had, money he had, and off to Rixie goes. And next thing you know, and of course the cost of medical school was such that he's borne that himself. He'll be paying that back over a period of time, but now he's, of course, a successful anesthesiologist. In an anesthesiologist group, they all, that way they can work together and cover things and also have vacation time. And he's got his family positioned in an area where they have lots of support for Down syndrome. He has one of the Rosie, good medical plans. And so he's well set. But he's always been amazing. He's one of these children that God sends you that's going to do it. And he had it. And of all the kids, genetically, and to look at him, he looks the most like Carolyn's family. They've got some of that raw pioneer, just get it done kind of energy. And then Andy, when he was born, I just knew this was my kindred spirit. He looks like me. You see the pictures of him when he was a teenager and the pictures of me. Sally's looked at him and she just amazed how much alike we looked at that age. And of course, this gal he married, a Catholic family, but all her girlfriends growing up were LDS girls.
I don't know that they all were.
Well, the ones that she spent the time around, the President Rigby, who's in the stake president later, our patriarch, all his granddaughters, those were her friends. That's who she ran with, and that's how she met Andy. Decided I want him.
I think she just liked him.
Oh, but she is amazing. If you're sitting in a room with a bunch of kids, all the kids go to her. They just, her purity and her just sweetness. I mean, everybody loves Marissa. Animals, small, it's her. And because it's really the first one that they'd ever dated, seriously. They're just glued together. There was never an alternative. It was just them. That he's got somebody he loves and cherishes, and he's working for Apple. He's selling phones and this, that, and everything. And she is a headhunter for Apple. She finds employees for Apple. Right now, Silicon Valley's in a bit of a tumble.
Well, the bank just collapsed.
Yeah, and so everybody's kind of wondering how long they've got
Yeah,
jobs.
it is.
At this point in time, I wanted children, I've got children, and every one of them is just special and different. And I love them all. I just love them all. And I've arrived at this point in my life where I'm dealing with medical issues and this, that, and the other. But I've lived 77 years. The Bible gives you 70, right? you know. And my cup runneth over in that sense, you know. And I would say that I've gotten a lot of counseling from the VA for issues around PTSD and all this other stuff, and have come to understand myself better, understand my relationship with Carolyn better, and trying at this point in my life to just kind of put it all together, and very grateful to Heavenly Father and Christ, you know, the atonement. I mean, where would we be without that, right? I mean, so I don't know if that pretty much sums up my life at this point, but that's where I am this moment.
I think we have on tape what we want to have on tape, and we've left out the stuff we don't want on tape.
Yeah.
I think we're good. You know, you did take a nice vacation to Europe.
Yeah.
And you did take a nice vacation down into Mexico. Isn't that about when your house got robbed? You were in that vacation in Mexico, and I was.
Yeah, well, we were going back to my first marriage at that point.
I got.
But yeah, we went.
Yeah.
We took that Volkswagen, picked it up in Amsterdam. I bought a Dutch double-walled tent, which I used later in my life
You mentioned.
for camping and various things, and took off and camped our way through Europe. We went down through the Netherlands. I remember camping in a Belgian farmer's field, and him telling us that if I speak the local dialect here in Belgium, I can talk the Welsh, and you know, the old Belgian, the Celtic languages and stuff. I can remember down through France, camping outside of Paris for days and days, and just going out to Versailles and all around Paris, and then we tootled down through France. We just wound our way down through the provinces, up in the hill country, and all the various specialties, the old women on the streets making lace, and the towns where the whole towns did nothing but copperware, you know, and all these, and then tootled on down into Spain, and then down across the Riviera, tootled on down the coast of Italy. I remember eating clam spaghetti in a restaurant that was hanging precariously off a cliff near Pisa. Actually climbed to the top of that, you know. But you know, it was, and I know that sort of thing would be perhaps interesting to some people. That tootled on down, you know, through Rome and Pompeii. I didn't go further than Pompeii. I didn't go way down into southern Italy, and then tootled back up and tootled through Switzerland. You know, beautiful, beautiful countryside, and tootled on into Austria, and all those abbeys like the Abbey at Melt, and hung around Vienna for a while, and camped outside there, and went to the Prater, that big amusement park outside of Vienna with the big Ferris wheel, and then back into Germany, Munich, and Nuremberg, and went to Bubenreuth, north of Nuremberg, where I knew was the music instrument making capital of Germany. Bought a Renaissance lute. I don't know if you remember that thing when I brought it back from Europe. I ended up selling it cracked, and I got discussed with it, you know, moist Europe, California, middle of summer, in the wood crack. Shouldn't have happened,
Well,
but
that atmosphere is different.
so different. I sold that to Mr. Chase at the Claremont Folk Music Center. But anyway, and took her where I had been stationed in the Army. Even took her out to Little Wirehoff when I was attached to that artillery battery, and showed her where I lived on the top of that fourth floor building. Went up, visited her Carolyn Dieters's ancestral town of Allendorf. Spent about a week there, hung out with her cousins, relatives from her family, and tootled up to Hamburg, and then into Denmark, and then took the boat across to Malmo, tootled up through Sweden, ended up in Norway, went way up to Oslo, went to the Heyerdahl Museum and saw the Kon-Tiki raft and all those famous Viking ships, the Oseberg, the Drak Oseberg, and all that. Remember that picture of me eating fish on the docks in Oslo. By then I had a little mustache going, and then tootled back down, and eventually ended up back in Amsterdam and flew home. But we spent the better part of the summer over there just doing that, touring around Europe. And then we went to Mexico, went down. Um, that was an interesting trip because we got across the border, got on a Mexican bus, headed for Mexico City eventually. But got on the bus, and it broke down in some little tiny town. The bus caught fire, and so we're all scrambling off, and we're standing off the side of the road. And right there where we got off the bus is this Mexican funeral with all the caskets displayed in the window. I'm watching the bus burn. And eventually Mexico City, discovered a French restaurant we liked in Mexico City. We've been down about a week or so, and went out to Teotihuacan, actually went up to Tula. And I never got down into the Yucatan, which I always wanted to do, but I studied a lot. I knew what I'd see when I get there. I mean, it wasn't as if it was something that I had no idea about. I was always one to kind of study things out. I was always picture oriented. I'd look at pictures and all the little details and everything. So I did a lot of my touring in my mind, you know, and reading and looking at pictures. I was always photo oriented. And Carolyn and I took a similar
You were there
trip.
2 weeks once.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Went down and we actually stopped in Cuernavaca, and we also stopped in Guadalajara. Guadalajara is closer up to the border. Checked into a hotel and ran into a long-term family, friends of her family, right in the hotel where we were staying.
Yeah, it was kind of a funny.
That was
coincidence.
funny. Then went down to the little expatriate American community in Ajijic, where all the Americans hung out, and met some American folks down there, and it was nice. One guy missed American dill pickles. He wanted me to send him a jar of dill pickles. Eventually, we ended up down in Mexico City. Went out to did we go to Tula? I don't think we went to Tula. We did go.
We saw the families.
We went to Teotihuacan. Then we kept touring south. We went to Cuernavaca, and then we went down to Tasco, the old mining. It was a mining heart of Mexico where they mined so much silver out of that mine at Tasco that at one point the owners of the mine said, if the Pope will visit Mexico, we will pave the road from Veracruz to Mexico City with silver.
But he didn't do it.
He didn't, but
That would have been a lot of silver.
but they were just pulling so much silver out of that thing, and it was still a silver mining area. We hung around in Tasco, met a German immigrant who was there he was a buyer for jewelry. I think he was there buying jewelry because they were making a lot of jewelry and that kind of stuff. So we had a really cool experience too. So I've done 2 expeditions like that down into Mexico at different times.
Yeah, people would want to know about that.
I suppose so.
I always thought it was interesting.
Yeah. We took a family vacation when the kids were older. We went across the Southwest. That's when we went to, Carlsbad Caverns, Roswell. We visited Lincoln Coal House. Went up in the hills, up there where the great observatory is above, up the hills. Went back to showed them our house in Tularosa, and went down to Alamogordo where they have this huge space center, the NASA Space Center.
That was interesting.
Big museum, and it was a good kind of thing. Then we stayed in a bed and breakfast out there in the middle of nowhere. I remember doing that, and went to areas where what is it, Chaco Canyon, one of those
Yeah,
other,
we did that. That was
where
interesting.
they
I love chocolate.
that kind of stuff, yeah. So we had a really very, very nice family vacation just to give the kids a chance to see the world. And I do remember that vacation we took as a family where we went back to Nauvoo. Remember that?
Yes,
And
I was with you.
yeah, you were there, and you know what happened that day that was really special? Do you remember who gave that speech? We went to the park and listened to who speak. Remember what it was?
Well, I heard a bunch of people speak. Paul Dunn was there, and the entire First Presidency was there, the prophet.
And you know why they were
all
there?
the heads, yeah, they were dedicating 18 of the homes that had been refurbished the Kimballs went in there, and they did the Heber C. Kimball home because
Yeah.
it was their ancestor, and it got them started. They actually did 18 of those homes, and they were dedicating them. So all
You know
of
what
the
else they-
presidencies of
You
the
know what else they
Union-
were dedicating? Remember, they were dedicating the temple site
Oh,
for the rebuilding of the temple, which didn't come along, but basically rededicating it for the potential future rebuilding of the Nauvoo temple. That
Spencer
was-
W. Kimball spoke.
That's right, yeah, that was what was happening. That day was the day that they rededicated the temple site.
Mm-hmm. As part of the entire.
Right, of the part of the entire thing, but, of course, now there's a Nauvoo temple. I haven't seen it in person, but I look at all the pictures and compare the pictures of the tower with the historic pictures, and, of course, they've got that flat profile Angel Moroni they had on the original one, they've replaced with a more rounded Angel Moroni and this, that, and the other, but they just went out of their way to try to make that just as perfect as they could.
I did an endowment there, by the way.
Oh, you did?
In the
Yeah,
Nauvoo
yeah.
Temple.
Yeah.
And Winter Corners Temple I've been to.
And then we went down to Tom. Then we went down to the cave, Tom Sawyer Cave,
Yeah,
and right into the town of Hannibal, and
went to where Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens had lived.
yeah.
And the judge who was the model for Judge Thatcher, the various people, they had fictitious names, but they were real people.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Tom
So-
Sawyer was kind of Samuel Clemens himself.
But we as a family didn't do a lot of excursions. We did, around California and stuff, and we went up to the area where her ancestors had been in Northern California. They came over the Oregon Trail, and you could then go into Oregon, you could dip down into California, and that's up around Winters. Is that right, Carol?
Well, it came down through the northeastern corner of California, somewhere in that, and then
The
down
Oregon Trail.
to Redding. They settled they settled around Mount Shasta. They lived in Dunsmuir. They lived in I think there was a Shasta City or something like that. They lived in McLeod for a while. So
Yeah, so we went up and kind
Montgomery,
of,
there was a little town called Montgomery Creek, and the ancestors' names were Montgomery. So we couldn't never find a connection, but be surprised if it wasn't.
it almost certainly was.
Yeah, I
kind of
couldn't find the
related.
connection, and I looked. There's actually a genealogy center right there in their local mall, and it was interesting.
And we took them to Mount Lassen, we took them to Burning Falls.
My grandmother predated the museum. The museum in McLeod went back to about 1920 or 21, and she was there as a girl in about 1912 or so. So she predated the museum.
Yeah. See, her family, that was the car. They were in California. They show up in the 1850 census.
Mhm.
That's how.
That's early.
So I'm married to a genuine Californian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And her father was born in Winters, which is, I don't know if you know where Winters is. You got
It's outside of Davis.
Davis, where Davis is up there.
Yeah, the University of
And they
California.
were
medical schools there, in Davis.
They were a Kentucky family, but her father was actually born in California. They were apricot farmers. They grew apricots up there in the Central Valley,
Yeah, I thought the trips ought to be on there. I think we got on there what we want on there.
Okay.
I think we don't have on there what we don't want on there.
Yeah.
I feel very satisfied.
What would you say if you were making a movie? You'd say, "This is a wrap." That's what you say. This is a wrap.
Is a wrap. It's kind of funny when Jed was young. I saw you because I remember if I'd come visit you, he was so inquisitive. He always wanted to know things. He was always asking you questions. He was you.
Well, he's very bright man. He's got one of these crazy IQs, like what, in the 140s or something.
Well, he was a geek.
Dennis was like that. Dennis always wanted to know.
I never had
everything,
an IQ test.
how it works.
The closest I ever got to an IQ test was when they were evaluating Bobby. We were living in Vallejo, and right over in what they call the Panhandle in San Francisco. It's a big park that then leads into the Golden Gate Park, and right along that there's a big grassway there, and there was offices and doctors' offices all along the Panhandle, and so Mom and Dad took Bobby to be evaluated there.
Mhm.
And I was along. I was 5 or 6 years old. And they did just a kind of a brief evaluation of me. But most of the time, they were in the doctor's office with Bobby, and I played in the Panhandle at Central Park and as a small boy, 5-year-old, and with Mom out there and whatnot. But while Bob was in evaluation. But that's the only time I ever got anything that would be close to a. They wanted to check me against Bobby for intelligence. It wasn't really an IQ test, but I never had an IQ test.
You were smarter than me, and I tested at 129, but I also, there was one time when there was a thing, it was on the internet, and I took it, and I came out at 155.
Really?
There's different kinds of intelligence.
That's it, different kinds of.
Well, the thing about an IQ test, it's really misleading,
Yeah,
because you can know a ton of things,
Mhm.
but what the IQ tests, they're looking for, can you take this and extrapolate how this becomes that, or that,
Yeah.
you know, they want some, function, they want,
Yeah.
they want you.
I've seen some of that. I understand that, but I never had one.
Yeah.
I have no
but
idea.
I had just those two, and what my real IQ, I don't know, and I certainly know I slipped, but you were always smarter than me, so if I come up about
I don't think that's true.
if I come out at
I think
129 or
that
155,
I think we were
have to
both
do the
smart in our
changes.
own ways. I never felt like I was smarter than you, ever.
Well, I always knew you were.
I wouldn't say so. You look at the skill you have with retaining stuff and putting things together in systems.
different kind of intelligence.
It was no. I don't think you can compare you and I. I think that we were a Heavenly Father. I think we were a match set
I think we were
because we took care of
uniquely,
each other. You know.
yeah, we were uniquely different. And Mom knew that we were uniquely different. Remember whenever she died and she wrote that thing where she talked about each of us? Dennis was this way, and oh, how different Philip was.
Mhm.
Oh, how different Philip was. So we were extremely different, but in a good way.
Yeah, but yeah. Well, you know, we had each other's backs growing up. You know, when all that moving around, when friends and pets came and go. You know, we always had each other, and that was very important.
That bothered me with Corky.
Yeah, that wasn't right.
Yeah.
Like, how do you
Because
take
that's
a
a violation of trust.
how do you
trusted
take a
them if you were
child's
gone.
pet from them?
Yeah, you
Yeah, but-
trusted them to
Yeah.
take care of your pet while you were gone, and trusted them that he would be there for you when you got home. So they broke their promise to you.
That
No,
dog-
that sounds too legalistic. I see it from a different way.
That dog was.
We had Aunt Lizzie, who never married, who lived by herself. We left her with Corky, and she suddenly had a companion in her life.
She loved Corky.
Of course she
Dearly
did.
loved Corky, and I understand it too.
Yeah, and so I don't put it in legalistic terms. I think of it that Corky gave to her something that she dearly needed, and it was just very hard for her to give that up.
Yeah.
And I have no judgment against her at all.
Well, I don't hold a grudge against Aunt Lizzie at all for it.
Yeah,
What I'm saying is, oh, how hard that was
for you personally.
at,
Yeah,
at
yeah.
that time of my
It
life.
was.
Yeah.
Because it's, oh, I can't wait to get back to Corky. Oh, it's only 2 more years. It's only 100. It's only this many days. Oh, next week I'll have Corky. Oh, no, you don't get Corky.
Yeah, you know, I never thought about him in Japan because he was your dog.
Well, I got Susie Q.
Yeah, we had Susie.
So I had a dog,
Yeah,
but of course I had to leave Susie Q.
but Corky was your dog, and I guess I never felt a longing. We had to get back to Corky. I knew he was there, but for me personally, that was your dog.
But to
It was,
this
you know, it was
day,
your dog.
I've never harbored a grudge against Aunt Lizzie.
Yeah,
I just recognized how hard it was
Yeah.
for that to happen to me.
oh yes, oh yeah.
It was so hard.
Yeah.
As far as her taking care of him and loving him and developing a
And what he did for
companionship.
her, the companion.
So
You know.
he probably did more good for her than he would have done for me. But the heartache I felt was real. I was just heartbroken. And I remember we'd go to visit her, and there'd be Corky, and I'd feel it all over again. There's my
Oh.
dog, and I can't have my dog.
Yeah.
And so every time I'd go down there, I'd feel it. You know, like,
Yeah, I didn't go through that. I mean, at that point in time, you know, Corky was Aunt Lizzie's at that point in my mind. So I never realized you were going through that. He was your dog, and so
Yeah.
I didn't have any particular attachment to him.
Mhm.
I loved him like, you know, he was a pet among kids. We all loved him, but he was your dog, and then he was Aunt Lizzie's dog,
Yeah,
in my mind's eye.
but,
And I never
yeah.
perceived or realized what you felt. at
I
that
was going
level.
through torture.
Yeah,
And,
interesting.
but as far as loving Aunt Lizzie, what a wonderful person she was to us. And, you know, how many times did she take us to Disneyland? Rohr's Aircraft would have a deal, and back whenever you had to have a book and you had an A, B, C, and D and E ticket, no, we didn't. We had a magic key. Okay, here's everything in the park.
Yeah, the day I went to Disneyland, they put a green ribbon, a thin green ribbon, around your wrist and clamped it with a little brass clamp,
Mhm.
and that meant you write everything.
Yeah.
That was all it was just a ribbon around your wrist.
Mhm.
And of course later the e-tickets and all that stuff. But that first time that I went, it was just a green ribbon around my wrist.
Mhm.
And I kept that ribbon for years among my little piles of junk here and there. I probably still had that ribbon when I went in service somewhere.
Mhm.
It was still among my stuff.
Yeah. Did you know that Aunt Lizzie bought my Letterman sweater when I was at Chaffey High School?
You told me that. At one point in time, you did tell me that.
Yeah, so don't think that I don't love and appreciate Aunt Lizzie. I just hated losing my
Okay.
dog.
Yeah,
You,
yeah.
you know, did you notice I was almost in tears when I saw Bippy the other day on your picture? It's kind of like, I love my pets. I always loved animals, and they always loved me, you know.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if they had a dog, if there was any dog in the house, it gravitated to me and Mom. Whether it was Firosh, whether it was Susie Q, because you know, a cat, like they had all those cats, they gravitated to me. I remember Salt and Pepper sleeping, one of them on this side of my head and one on the other side, and I wasn't even that close to Salt and Pepper. They just loved me. I love animals.
Well, I think people put out a vibe that tells the animals I'm safe here.
Yeah.
This person accepts me and there's no danger, you know, that kind of. And that's kind of like with Andy's wife, Marissa. I mean, small children, animals just, you know, they just, not only do they gravitate to her, they get attached to her.
Uh,
Yeah.
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 Tuffy was my cat. George Jr. Washington is who we left when we went to Japan.
Yeah.
And we left him with Aunt Lizzie too. But cats, you know, the minute they wander away, then they've wandered away. And she would tell us that he would come by every couple of weeks and touch bases, and then he'd be gone again. Then she wouldn't see him for months, and then he'd come back after, you know. And it just got longer and longer. And then one day he never came back, and that was before we got home. So George Jr. Washington was never going to be there, and I knew that.
Remember Mom's cat Smokey?
Smokey, yeah.
Yeah, and it finally took her off to the pound and she escaped and came home. Remember that?
Do you remember Aunt Lizzie got one of Smokey's children, the kittens, which looked just like her, and so Smokey, the other Smokey, became Aunt Lizzie's cat, and she actually had a leash for a cat. Can you imagine a leash for a
I
cat?
don't remember that.
Yeah, that was Smokey. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was a lot more visiting time that you and the younger kids had after I was gone in the service, you know, where you would go back and forth and that, you know, but I still have really strong memories. I think of Dale and Lionel, you know. Dale had his issues. Lionel was just such a sweet, quiet, humble kid. And
I loved Lionel. What a great guy. You know, he moved into, when Renee and I were living in Montclair, he moved into Montclair, he and his second wife,
oh, really?
or first wife it was.
Yeah. But that accident just so damaged his life.
Oh,
That, you know, and whatnot, and he didn't live long, but he was just the sweetest, mellowest little kid.
yeah. He got a ranch,
Yeah.
and he raised horses.
Horses, riding. It was a riding school. So.
Yeah, and he would have people come out there to ride, and
Yeah.
you know, when I went to his funeral, it was there at that same cemetery, Glen Abbey, where Aunt Lizzie and Uncle Jack and
Oh, is
even-
that where Lionel was buried?
Yeah, he's
Oh.
buried there, right next to the chapel where they had the funeral, and we go there every once in a while. We've been there 2 or 3 times since he
I
died.
didn't realize that's where he was.
But I went to that, and I remember that it was a cowboy funeral. And I remember this thing, I'm heading for the last round. They're singing it.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, and I'm sitting there, the last round, tears streaming down my eyes, because I just loved that guy. He was a good guy. He had a great sense of humor.
Yeah, no, I took out insurance for my burial and stuff, but the funeral home that's handling me is right here on Fremont Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
We drove past it coming in the night,
Mm-hmm.
the other night. But the way it's set up, I'll be prepared there, and and I'll pay for it. I'm being driven down to Riverside, and there'll be a service there, and I will be interred at Riverside.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, right near March Air Force Base. And Mom and Dad are there.
Yeah, but did you know that's where I'm going?
I didn't know it. Uncle Hess is there too.
Yeah, I figured I'd be with the rest of the family members.
Mm-hmm.
So when
Bob's
the
in.
time comes, they'll probably have a memorial service here at some point in time, either before or after the funeral. But I will be basically taken down there, and they'll have whatever service they have there, and I'll be interred in the Riverside.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm headed.
You got all that paperwork underneath the fireproof box, right?
Yeah, it's right. It's all the insurance policy. It's all been prepaid ahead. I did that a few years back.
Dad did that too, by the way.
Yeah.
When he had passed away, it was all pre-done. And
Yeah.
What was funny is it was called Arlington Mortuary,
Mm.
like Arlington National Cemetery.
Right.
It was Arlington Mortuary.
Well, this is this place here is the Holy Ghost or something. It's a Catholic family that runs it, but I kind of checked around in that recently when I went for it. I thought about being buried up here. I've gone up and visited his grave a couple of times. Jim Cook is right up here in South San Francisco.
Oh, is he?
That's where he's buried. But he died. He was a freshman at San Jose State when he died, and his parents were living down there in San Jose.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
And his parents also owned a fried chicken restaurant right here in Fremont, Five Corners.
You know, I actually went to San Jose State, and I was going to play football for him, and I was there about 4 or 5 days. You actually came out and saw me practice one day when I was at San Jose State, and I'd been there about 4 or 5 days. And the year before, they had played BYU, and their black kids refused to play, and that was back whenever various schools would do things like that, where the blacks would boycott. In fact, when I was at UC Riverside, our blacks didn't play against the University of Redlands.
Why was that?
They would
Wasn't
come
that
up.
Church
They
of the
would.
Brethren?
They would come up with some reason, which never made any sense to me, and that they chose Redlands. It could have been, but anyway. So we played Redlands without our black kids, and but anyway. Joe McMullen, who was the head coach, he was saying, now I realize you guys boycotted BYU last year, and if you want to boycott them again, you can boycott them again because they're racist bastards and blah, 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 blah. Oh, and I wasn't active in the church at all at that time. And I'm going, that's my mom and dad's church. I'm not going to put up with this. And I got in the car and I came home. I never told mom and dad why I came home. And I would have made a difference for them because
You should have wrote him a letter.
they didn't have a great football team.
Yeah, you should
I
have.
was going to be a pretty big.
Oh yeah. Well,
So they called me
so
at
much
home.
politics at that time. The Black Panther movement.
They called me at home and they said, "We'll up your scholarship. Anything, come back." And Dad says you ought to go back. And I gave him a lame excuse because I didn't want to admit that it was him doing that about the church, because I didn't want to admit to him that I even had any feelings about the church one way or the other, because I was completely turned off to it at that time. But that's the reason I came back from San Jose State, or I would have been there. And like I'm saying, if they had had me, they would have been a better football team.
Well, thank you for this whole interview. Maybe it's time to click it and move on, but.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. She said there's a red button.